Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, August 21st, 2024. Democratic National Convention Day 3. Tonight, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota accepts the vice presidential nomination. And other speakers include former President Bill Clinton and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Chicago Police Superintendent Larry Snelling says a violent group of protesters showed up Tuesday night outside the Israeli consulate to attack police and wreak havoc. But he said, "We will not allow people to come to the city, disrespect it, and destroy it." Dozens were arrested. Republican presidential nominee, former President Donald Trump, and vice presidential nominee, Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, campaign in North Carolina today on the subject of national security. Donald Trump also talking about the Labor Department revising downward the number of jobs the economy created over the last year. He calls it a scandal. And this was the first Donald Trump outdoor campaign rally since surviving an assassination attempt last month. Bulletproof glass around the stage, part of the enhanced security. And Congressman Bill Pascrell, Democrat of New Jersey, has died at the age of 87. Another congressman from New Jersey, Democrat Frank Pallone, posting on X, Bill Pascrell has never forgotten where he came from, leaving an indelible mark on North Jersey as a mayor, a public school teacher, an assemblyman, and a congressman who never, ever backed down from doing what was right. Story from Nexstar. The first two nights of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago put a spotlight on presidents and former first ladies who know what it takes to win and hold the White House. On Wednesday night, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz will make the case that he's ready not only to win the 2024 race, but help run the country when President Joe Biden's term comes to an end in January. Walz and former President Bill Clinton will headline the Democratic National Convention on Wednesday, the third day of the party's choreographed rollout of a new candidate, Kamala Harris, and her pitch to voters. That was from Nexstar. At the daily Democratic National Convention news conference in Chicago today, Governor Andy Beshear, Democrat of Kentucky, spoke about Governor Walz's speech tonight.
He is a teacher, a coach, and a lifelong hunter. Tim won his very first state in something that I know, a deep red district, by fighting for farmers and for rural communities. Tim understands that we don't govern to move a country or a state to the right or the left. Tim won his first race by recognizing that our job is to move our people forward, no matter how hard Donald Trump tries to drag us backwards. When people wake up in the morning, they are not thinking about the most recent rant by Donald Trump on Truth Social. They're thinking about their job and whether they make enough to support their families. They're thinking about the next doctor's appointment for themselves, their parents, or their kids. They're thinking about the roads and bridges they're going to drive that day. They're thinking about the public safety in their community and the public school they're going to drop their kids off that day. That is how Tim Walz has governed in Minnesota, addressing people's everyday needs, and it's why he has done such a good job for everyone, Democrat, Republican, Independent, lifting all of his citizens up. When you look at Tim, you see a Democratic governor delivering results in every community, from the cities to the suburbs to rural towns. Like Vice President Harris, he has worked around the clock to help middle-class families get ahead. He brought Minnesota to the lowest unemployment rate of any state in recorded history. He signed the largest tax cut in state history to put money back in families' pockets. Under his leadership, Minnesota, along with Kentucky, is now one of the top states to do business. He increased funding for law enforcement to keep Minnesotans safe. He took action to protect reproductive freedoms when Donald Trump's Supreme Court stripped them away. That's what leadership looks like. So I couldn't be more excited for the Harris-Walz ticket, because I know that they'll keep fighting tooth and nail for all of us Americans. They'll lower costs for middle-class families. They will protect our freedoms. They will expand access to affordable health care. They'll make sure our country moves forward and not backward. President Biden said that picking Kamala Harris as his vice president was the first and the best decision he made as nominee for president. I know that we will look back and say the same thing about President Harris's selection of Coach Walz. And maybe hearing that from me is something. But I love Tim Walz. He's a good man. He's been there for me. He's going to be a great vice president. He's going to be a great role model for all Americans. I'm proud that my kids are going to get to watch him give that speech tonight. And I couldn't be more excited for his family to share in this moment with him.
Governor Andy Beshear, Democrat from Kentucky, at the daily Democratic National Convention news conference in Chicago today. Washington Post article reads that Democratic vice presidential candidate Tim Walz will be nominated for the role by Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar and a former student Wednesday at the Democratic National Convention, according to a Harris-Walz campaign official, spoke on the condition of anonymity to share internal plans. Klobuchar is a close ally of the Minnesota governor and has called him a good friend in recent interviews. She said that her mother-in-law delivered dinner to the Walz family when their son was born, and that her husband is from the town where Walz coached football. Walz will also be nominated by Ben Ingman, a former student and next-door neighbor of the Walz family. Walz coached Ingman's 7th grade basketball and track teams, and he'll be joined on stage by former football players at Mankato West High School who were coached by Walz, as well as former head coach Rick Sutton. That was from the Washington Post. Alex Hornbrook, convention executive director at today's DNC news conference, talked about who else you'll hear from tonight.
Last night you heard from Democrats, Republicans, and independents about how the Harris-Walz ticket is building on the transformative accomplishments of the Biden-Harris administration and laying out their bold vision for the future for our country. Tonight's theme, Fight for Our Freedoms, will showcase how Vice President Harris has spent her entire career fighting for America's freedoms and why she chose Governor Walz as her running mate, including his record as a champion for America's working families and a staunch defender of our fundamental freedoms. Tonight in our program, you're going to be hearing from everyday Americans whose freedoms and livelihoods hinge on this election. You'll also hear from some of our leaders, both in the Senate, Senator Cory Booker, Senator Chris Murphy, Catherine Cortez Masto, Amy Klobuchar, as well as our leaders in the House, including Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi. We'll also have some of our other fiercest champions of the Harris-Walz ticket, Governor Wes Moore, Governor Josh Shapiro, and Mayor Pete Buttigieg. You'll hear from Republicans, including Olivia Troy and Jeff Duncan, who are putting their country over their party. You'll also hear from President Clinton, who'll underscore the importance of this moment and this election, not just for our party, but for our country's future. And finally, of course, you'll hear from Governor Walz, our vice presidential nominee. He'll introduce himself to the American people tonight on the convention stage, highlighting the small-town values that have shaped his lifetime of service and his commitment to safeguarding the freedoms that we all hold dear.
Alex Hornbrook, Democratic National Convention Executive Director at the daily DNC news conference in Chicago. Tonight's convention session begins at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. You can listen and watch live, uninterrupted, complete coverage on the C-SPAN networks. 3 of the 4 living Democratic presidents or ex-presidents have speaking slots at the Democratic National Convention this year. President Biden was on Monday, former President Obama was on Tuesday, and former President Clinton is tonight. The grandson of the 4th, former President Jimmy Carter, spoke Tuesday night.
I'm Jason Carter. My grandfather, President Carter, will have his 100th birthday in October. I call him Pawpaw, and I can tell you that he wishes he could be here tonight. He and my grandmother led their lives with an unwavering faith in God, a respect for human dignity, honesty, and a commitment to loving their neighbors as themselves. Those principles guided them throughout their lives, including during their 4 years in the White House and the 4 decades since. For my grandfather, it was never about fame, recognition, accolades, or awards. His legacy is measured by the lives he has touched and the good he has done. Kamala Harris carries my grandfather's legacy. She knows what is right, and she fights for it. She understands that leadership is about service, not selfishness, that you can show strength and demonstrate decency, and that you can get a whole lot more done with a smile than with a scowl. Pawpaw is holding on. He's hopeful. And though his body may be weak tonight, his spirit is as strong as ever. My grandfather can't wait to vote for Kamala Harris. She reminds us all that the promise of America remains unchanged. We are one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And my grandfather knows that with her as our next president, we will keep that promise. Thank you.
Jason Carter, grandson of former President Jimmy Carter, at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago Tuesday night. Another grandson of another former Democratic president, John F. Kennedy, also spoke Tuesday, making comparisons between his relative and Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee this year.
Hi, I'm Jack Schlossberg. President John F. Kennedy is my grandfather, and he's my hero. JFK was the youngest person ever elected president and the first Catholic. He sent a man to the moon, fought for civil rights, and navigated the Cuban Missile Crisis peacefully. Most of all, he inspired a new generation to ask what they could do for our country. Tonight, JFK's call to action is now ours to answer, because once again, the torch has been passed to a new generation, to a leader who shares my grandfather's energy, vision, and optimism for our future. That leader is Vice President Kamala Harris. Like President Kennedy, Vice President Harris has dedicated her life to public service. She believes in America, like my grandfather did, that we do things not because they're easy, but because they are hard. As president, she will fight for working families. She will expand investments in clean energy so that my generation will have clean air and good jobs. She will defend our freedoms, the freedom for women anywhere in America to make their own healthcare choices, the freedom to be safe from gun violence, the freedom to vote easily and without fear. The choice is ours to make, and history is watching to see what we will do. Now, let's elect Kamala Harris the next President of the United States. Thank you.
Jack Schlossberg, former President John F. Kennedy's only grandson, speaking Tuesday at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. A Forbes article about him reads that the 31-year-old who was serving as a Democratic delegate for New York addressed the DNC amid his political and professional rise in recent months, including a Vogue gig and quirky social media presence. Vogue in July named Schlossberg its 2024 political correspondent, pointing to his ability to bring levity to a grave moment in American politics, in part via his TikTok and Instagram, on which he promotes his progressive politics and offers his young audience concise video explanations of complex topics, such as Supreme Court rulings and his uncle Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s presidential run, which he opposes. That was from Forbes. Another speaker tonight is Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary and former Democratic presidential candidate. Today, he spoke at the Illinois Democratic Party's breakfast in Chicago.
I saw our next president the other night, and she reminded me that we have to maintain the mentality of an underdog every step of the way. But the momentum is undeniable. The momentum is incredible. And I've been thinking about where that momentum is coming from. And there's so many parts to it, but one that maybe we don't talk about enough, is the simple fact that the American people agree with us on the issues that matter most in their lives. We got to remember that. For some reason, Democrats have this habit of sometimes feeling like our views must be unpopular. The reverse is true. Americans agree with us that it is the wealthy who are not paying their fair share, and the middle class that needs a break, not the other way around. Americans agree with us that in a free country, you are free to join a union and get a good day's wage and benefits for a good day's work. Americans agree with us that the best way to keep our children safe is not to censor Toni Morrison paperbacks and keep them out of the school library. It's to make sure that gun violence does not come to the steps of our schools or our homes or our neighborhoods. And yes, most Americans, the vast majority of Americans, agree with us that in a free country, you can be who you are, love who you love, and a woman's health care decisions are up to her and not some politician. I actually think even now we are underreacting to how significant Project 2025 is. the scandal of Project 2025. And that's the most interesting thing about it to me, that it's a policy scandal. Think about that. The biggest scandal facing the Republican Party right now, the one that they're actually afraid of, the thing that has them cowering and distancing themselves and making up excuses and doing damage control. It's not some criminal cover-up, although they've, got one of those going on too. It's not some sex scandal, although it's the simple fact that somebody actually wrote down all of their policies and plans, and it turns out their policies and plans are wildly unpopular, and the American people would rather go the direction we want to lead them when it comes to issues.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a former Democratic presidential candidate and reportedly on the short list for when Vice President Kamala Harris was choosing her running mate, speaking today in Chicago at the Illinois Democratic Party's delegation to the convention breakfast. Story from the Detroit News, Dateline Chicago. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told Michigan Democratic delegates Wednesday that the future of the nation is riding on the battleground Great Lakes State in a morning address where she was joined by current House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York and other high-profile Democrats. C-SPAN was at that morning breakfast of the Michigan Democratic delegation to the DNC. And here are the remarks from Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin, who is a U.S. Senate candidate.
It is quite literal to say that I wouldn't be here without Debbie Stabenow, right? Can we all recognize the first woman ever elected from Michigan to represent us at the state level, from the federal level? She's amazing. And I've gotten to learn from her all these years, but especially in the past couple of years. We just finished a Thelma and Louise driving tour around Michigan. We put some GoPro cameras in the car. I drove her around. It's not going to end like Thelma and Louise. We all know that that's a bad ending. But two gals driving around the state and her telling me stories of what it was like to run for the first time. Right, where the slogan for her opponent in her first race was basically, I'm not going to be beat by some broad. That was the slogan for her opponent. So the things she put up with, we are standing here as women in Michigan because she stepped forward first. And she and I can be very different, but there is no doubt that I'm able to be who I am because she was who she was and plowed through all this pessimism and the anger with women rising to the top. And now I will draw the through line between Debbie Stabenow and what we're all doing at this convention, which is getting ready to elect Kamala Harris, right? All the media in the back of the room, they're constantly asking all of us who are wandering around this convention, like, what do you think? Can we have our first woman president? Do Americans see women as leaders? Can we actually win in the state of, in the Midwest? You want to understand how to elect women to every higher office? Look at Michigan. You want to understand how to do it? Look at Debbie Stabenow and how she did it and how we stand on her shoulders. Michigan women are showing the whole damn country what it means to elect women. And then the good that comes after that. The good that comes from women who are empathetic. Right? Who is a better joyful warrior than Gretchen Whitmer? Right? Nobody. So if you want to understand to the media in the back of the room, like, is the country ready for the first American president? Look around at this room, look at Debbie Stabenow, and understand we are coming for Donald Trump.
Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin, Democrat from Michigan, U.S. Senate candidate at the Michigan Democratic Party delegation breakfast in Chicago, part of the Democratic National Convention, and she is running for the seat of the retiring Senator Debbie Stabenow, Democrat from Michigan. Again, DNC Night 3 of 4 begins at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, live coverage, uninterrupted, gavel to gavel, on C-SPAN Radio and C-SPAN Television. Former President Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee, and Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, the Republican vice presidential nominee, held rallies at the North Carolina Aviation Museum and Hall of Fame in Asheboro, North Carolina today, their latest stop of general election swing states this week. Their theme today was national security. Senator Vance spoke first.
But if you want to give her the benefit of the doubt and understand her foreign policy, remember that she bragged on CNN about playing a key role in the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now, that was before 13 innocent service members died at the Kabul airport. That was about 3 years ago to the day. That was before the world witnessed panicked civilians cling to the sides of retreating American airplanes. And that was before they gave the Taliban billions of dollars paid for by you, billions of dollars of helicopters, planes, Humvees, and artillery. It was the worst humiliation this country has endured since the fall of Saigon, and Kamala Harris says she's proud of what she did. It was treason. It was treason, and is it any wonder that Putin then invaded Ukraine on her watch? Or that Iran attacked Israel on her watch? Or that this very moment China is ramping up its aggression against Taiwan on her watch, when Kamala Harris walks in the room America's enemies sense weakness. And that's why we have got to fire Kamala Harris, not give her a promotion. Now, she wants to represent America all over the world, but she's terrified to face a friendly media. Does anyone think that the person who runs from the friendly American press could stand up to Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong-un or Xi Jinping? Of course you couldn't. So if you believe that a strong America requires a strong leader, I've got a recommendation for you. Why don't we re-elect President Donald J. Trump? And while we're on the topic, don't send her stolen valor sidekick. Send a former Marine. Send J.D. Vance to be vice president. We got some Marines out there. Semper Fi. Now, Kamala Harris, she gets really mad when I bring up the stolen valor of her running mate. But let me tell you why it matters. Every single person here understands why this matters. Here's the record on Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota. He dropped out of the military and allowed his unit to go to Iraq without him. And he knew they were going to Iraq. He lied about it, but he knew they were going to Iraq. Even his chaplain called him a coward. And those of you who served in the military know the chaplain is the nicest person in the unit. If the chaplain is calling you a coward, you must have really screwed up.
Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, Republican vice presidential nominee in Asheboro, North Carolina today. Story from Politico, 50 Republican members of Congress, all military veterans, have signed onto a letter to Governor Tim Walz condemning the Democratic vice presidential nominee for egregious misrepresentations of his military service and calling on him to come clean. The letter shared with Politico is signed by members of the House and Senate across the spectrum of Republicans, including longtime diehard supporters of former President Donald Trump and more moderate members from competitive House districts. It follows a statement signed Friday by 18 Democratic military veteran members of Congress defending Walz from attacks on his record. That article from Politico. About an hour after Senator Vance spoke to the crowd in Asheboro, North Carolina, former President Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee, spoke also about national security, but he started on the economy. And as a Fox Business article reads, U.S. job growth during much of the past year was significantly weaker than previously reported, according to new data published Wednesday. The Bureau of Labor Statistics revised down its total tally of jobs created in the year through March by 818,000 as part of the preliminary annual benchmark review of payroll data. That suggests the economy added an average of 174,000 jobs per month during that time period, below the previous 242,000 estimate. That was from Fox Business. Here is Donald Trump.
Before we begin, I want to address the massive scandal around the revised job numbers that were just announced this morning, a little while ago. Just before I came up, I got to see them. And it really isn't a revision. It's a total lie. Total lie. There's never been any revision like this. They wanted it to come out after the election, but somehow it got leaked. It got leaked. Government leaks too. The Harris-Biden administration has been caught fraudulently manipulating job statistics to hide the true extent of the economic ruin that they've inflicted on America. The new data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the administration padded the numbers with an extra, listen to this one, 818,000 jobs that don't exist. So they said they existed, and they never did exist. They built them up so that they could say what a wonderful job they're doing. No, we've never had numbers like this. They don't exist. They thought they could do it sometime after, we have an election coming up very quickly, but they wanted this to come out after November 5th when it wouldn't have meant so much, but it came out a little early, so there's a patriot in there someplace, right? The real numbers are much worse than that, and Comrade Kamala, she's Comrade, the most radical left person ever to run for a high political office in our country, gets another 4 years, millions of jobs, and it'll vanish overnight. She gets 4 more years, you're going to see jobs vanish. Millions and millions will vanish, and inflation will completely destroy our country.
Former President Donald Trump, Republican presidential nominee in Asheboro, North Carolina today. This was the first outdoor rally since the assassination attempt against him last month. He was surrounded on stage by bulletproof glass. Also, storage containers were around the perimeter of the rally space and snipers on the roofs. About those job numbers being revised, a CNN article explains every year the Bureau of Labor Statistics conducts a revision to the data from its monthly survey of businesses' payrolls, then benchmarks the March employment level to those measured by the quarterly Census of Employment and Wages program. The preliminary data marks the largest downward revision since 2009 and shows that the labor market wasn't quite as red hot as initially thought. However, job growth was still historically strong. That was from CNN. Wall Street today, the Dow up 55, NASDAQ up 102, S&P up 23. Congressman Matt Gaetz begins an ABC News article, defeated his Republican primary opponent on Tuesday in one of Florida's most conservative congressional districts, according to an Associated Press projection, handing former Speaker Kevin McCarthy a final blow to his so-called revenge tour against a handful of Republicans who helped oust him last year. Matt Gaetz posted on X shortly after the race was called, "Thank you, Florida won. I will never stop fighting for you." That was from ABC News. Congressman Gaetz also posted about a minute of his Tuesday night victory speech.
It's traditional in moments like these, with margins of victory like this, that you hear from your opponents. And I have not yet heard from Aaron Dimmick or Kevin McCarthy this evening. Kevin McCarthy spent $3 million in this race, not attacking my votes or my work on your behalf, but just simply trying to attack my character. $3 million. 2 years ago, I got 70% of the vote. And tonight, it looks like we're getting 73% of the vote. So Kevin, if you're watching, spend a little more next time and we'll get to 80.
That clip was posted by Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, from his Tuesday night victory speech. He added the music at the end after winning the Republican primary for re-election, and he is favored to win re-election in November in that conservative district. Story from the Anchorage Daily News in Alaska. Democratic incumbent Congresswoman Mary Peltola was in the lead after early results were reported in Alaska's primary election. Peltola had just over 50% of votes in a congressional race that featured a dozen candidates. In second place was Republican businessman Nick Begich III with 27% of the vote. Republican Lieutenant Governor Nancy Dahlstrom was in third with just over 20% of the vote. Sitting in fourth place was Republican Matthew Salisbury, who received 0.6% of the vote. The top 4 vote-getters in Alaska's primary advanced to the November election. Both Begich and Dahlstrom mounted high-profile campaigns to unseat Peltola in what is seen as one of the handful of congressional swing seats across the country that could determine the majority of the U.S. House in November. That was from the Anchorage Daily News. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, I'm Susan Swain. Campaign 2024 has evolved in some unexpected ways. And from now until Election Day, C-SPAN promises you unfiltered coverage of the candidates as they battle to win the White House and Congress. You may not know that C-SPAN is a private company that operates without a dime of government money. And like many media organizations, we've been impacted by cord cutting. This summer, we are asking for you to help support our unbiased political coverage with a donation. Here's the good news. 100% of your contribution, large or small, directly supports C-SPAN operations. And best of all, an anonymous donor has pledged to match your donation dollar for dollar up to $25,000. You can find out more at cspan.org/donate. Help ensure that C-SPAN's unique, long-form coverage of politics is here to stay. Visit cspan.org/donate. Thank you for watching, and thanks so much for your support.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. Sounds on the streets of Chicago Tuesday. Chicago Tribune reports after a night of tense protests that saw dozens of arrests outside the Israeli consulate. Chicago's top cop said Wednesday that his officers performed admirably in defending themselves from a violent group that showed up to attack police and wreak havoc on the city. We will not allow people to come to the city, disrespect it, and destroy it, Police Superintendent Larry Snelling told reporters at a daily briefing at the Office of Emergency Management and Communications. Enough is enough. Snelling told reporters there were between 55 and 60 arrests, including 3 journalists, during the pro-Palestinian demonstration. There were only 2 minor injuries, a testament, he said, to his officers' restraint and readiness. That was from the Chicago Tribune. Here's part of the news conference with the superintendent.
We will not allow people to come to this city, disrespect it, and destroy it. We expect the rest of the week to be better. That's what we're hoping for. We're hoping that people see that the Chicago Police Department is prepared, ready, willing, and able to defend this city. It's time to get a handle on anyone who wants to wreak havoc on this city, people who are committing violent acts throughout the city. It is time to bring Chicago back to where we know it can be.
Chicago Police Superintendent Larry Snelling at today's safety and security update for the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. He also said he was appalled by the vicious, nasty, sexually explicit things some demonstrators yelled at female officers, and proud that those officers and male officers nearby did not take the bait and overreact. Many of the protesters in Chicago are opposed to the war in Gaza, supporting Palestinians, calling for a U.S. weapons embargo on Israel. One group advertised their demonstration with the slogan, "Make it great like '68, invoking the anti-Vietnam War protesters who had violent encounters with the police during the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Superintendent Snelling had a message for them today.
I saw something in their eyes last night that I haven't seen in years. A level of pride knowing that they kept this city safe from those who came here to burn things, to burn flags, to fight with the police, to cause destruction, mayhem. Make it great like '68. That was what they brought here to Chicago. It's 2024. And the Chicago Police Department proved that. So let's get off of 1968. Let's stop talking about 1968. This is 2024. And the Chicago Police Department is proving that every single day. I cannot be more proud of the work that the men and the women of this department are doing right now to keep this city safe.
Chicago Police Superintendent Larry Snelling at a news conference in Chicago. Story from Fox News. Former President Donald Trump scolded those protesting outside the Democratic National Convention in Chicago Tuesday night after they clashed with police outside the Israeli consulate, leading to more than 70 arrests, according to media reports. So disgraceful to see the burning of the American flag and the desecration of police cars at the Democrats' party taking place in Chicago, Trump said on his platform Truth Social Wednesday. Congress should immediately get to work. Anyone burning the American flag gets 1 year in jail. Just do it. C-SPAN spoke to Douglas Brinkley, author and historian, about the comparisons of this year's Democratic National Convention in Chicago with the 1968 convention, also in Chicago.
A lot of people have been comparing this year with 1968, a year where there was political unrest over foreign wars, political violence, an incumbent president not seeking re-election, and of course a Democratic convention in Chicago. As a historian, what do you make of those connections?
Well, it's not really apropos, except that there's an element of protest over Israel-Gaza, and then you had Vietnam in 68. But in 68, there was a traumatized Democratic Party that the party itself was deeply divided between the Doves anti-Vietnam War behind Eugene McCarthy, senator from Minnesota, and then the Johnson administration represented by Hubert Humphrey, the sitting vice president. And it was a division inside the arena, and then the outside, Mayor Daley over-policed. They didn't have modern security apparatus. They didn't have the right helicopters telling you where to go. They weren't able to use things that we can do with modern security apparatus and just cyber world in general. And so it was just dominated, the visuals, by the protesters, the tear gas, the beatings, and counterculture figures became stars. A poet, Allen Ginsberg, or the absurdist writer, Terry Southern. You had the Yippies, Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, and Black Panther, Bobby Seale. And so there was a circus commotion in the streets of Chicago. That doesn't exist. People are sitting in cafes right now, sipping tea, and it's pretty calm in the main downtown of Chicago. But I do think in Chicago this year, security, and because President Trump, former President Trump, was shot in Butler, Pennsylvania, and there's that inexplicable building where is the security for speech? Chicago Police Department has partnered with Illinois, the state, with the governor, and Homeland Security. So they have a kind of cordoned off situation here like I haven't seen at a convention before. I think it was intense in Milwaukee, but it seems to take on a new dimension in a city the size of Chicago.
Douglas Brinkley, author and historian at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, part of a C-SPAN interview. About 15 miles from downtown Chicago is Bridgeview, Illinois. And because it has the largest Palestinian population in the U.S., it's sometimes called Little Palestine. C-SPAN went there and spoke to a few of the people.
My name is Jawahar Kamel. I'm a Palestinian activist from Atlanta, Georgia, and I came into the DNC yesterday to participate in this event.
In the DNC?
Yes.
So what did you see while you were over there?
Well, I came in yesterday, and what I saw, I was outside, of course. I seen a lot of people. I seen a lot of love, a lot of peace, calling for equality, calling for dignity, calling for people could live together in one place. Let's talk about it right now here in the U.S. because it's a very important event for the Palestinian and for other people, of course, here in the U.S. and other issues we're dealing with.
So you were participating in a protest outside the DNC?
Yes.
And how long were you there?
I was there the whole day, and I'm planning to stay until Thursday. There's 3 days event, and I'm planning to stay in those 3 days.
Before the camera started rolling, you were talking about the police presence there. Tell us a bit about that.
The police presence, there was a lot of police. It was surprising for me. It's actually more than when we went to the Netanyahu visit in Washington. I seen yesterday a lot of the police forces, but we understood as protesters that they are there to protect everybody, for us, to control what's going on, but they were not there because we're violent or we're trying to plan something. So it's a big event, but I was really surprised.
A lot of people are saying that they're conflicted about how they're going to vote in this election because of the Democrats' stance in this conflict between Israel and Hamas. Do you know have you decided how you're going to vote?
Election this year is very important because this is an ongoing event in the last 10 months in Palestine that it's end up affecting our people in here in the United States for a lot of reasons. But one of them, we find out that all of our tax money is going to Israel, billions of dollars going to Israel to support Israel in her war crime against the Palestinian. Another thing is why this money was not being used for people in here, for homeless people, to get a better health care, to pay for a student loan, a lot of the student. So this is a lot of effect on people, and everybody's participating. It's not just they protesting for Palestine and Gaza. Yesterday in one of the speakers is Dr. Cornel West, and he talked about how it's important for all of us to stand up together as people, not as just like we stand up for everybody. As a Palestinian, I'm standing up for everybody. I'm a human being. I was telling the chief of police yesterday, look at me with your heart, don't look at me with your eyes. Look at me as a mother. Look at those kids right now in the protest as your children. You want to get them hurt? They want to go home to their family. They're there for freedom, and they did what they have to do, and they need to leave.
Thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
A C-SPAN interview with an activist in Bridgeview, Illinois, about 15 miles from Chicago, an area known as Little Palestine because of the large Palestinian population. That activist was not from the area, though, and came in to protest at the Democratic National Convention. From the White House, a statement, President Biden spoke with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel to discuss the ceasefire and hostage release deal and diplomatic efforts to de-escalate regional tensions. Vice President Harris also joined the call. And a Reuters article says this call follows U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's whirlwind trip to the Middle East that ended on Tuesday without an agreement between Israel and Hamas militants on a truce in the Palestinian enclave. Blinken and mediators from Egypt and Qatar have pinned their hopes on a U.S. bridging proposal aimed at narrowing the gaps between the two sides in the 10-month-old Gaza war. That was an article from Reuters. And from the Jerusalem Post, Israel's former ambassador to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, posted a video on Tuesday accusing the UN of failing to allocate a place of commemoration for the victims of October 7th on the International Day of Remembrance and Tribute to the Victims of Terrorism. He said there are no words to describe how morally corrupt and twisted the UN is. It's simply a disgrace. October 7th saw 1,200 Israelis massacred by Hamas, a designated terrorist organization by the U.S., U.K., and EU. That was from the Jerusalem Post. Today is that day of remembrance, and the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres posted a video.
Today, we remember and honor the victims and survivors of terrorism. Acts of terrorism create a wave of unimaginable grief. Families and communities torn apart by terrorist acts are forever changed. The scars, both visible and invisible, never fully heal. Through the torment and tragedy, we have also witnessed remarkable examples of resilience and the enduring power of our common humanity. This year's theme is Voices for Peace, Victims of Terrorism as Peace Advocates and Educators. We pay tribute to all victims and survivors, including those who have chosen to share their stories about perseverance and forgiveness. Reflecting on personal trauma to educate others is an act of immense courage. This day urges us to listen and to learn, and it is a reminder that we must always seek out the light of hope. Together, we can raise up the voices of all victims and survivors. Together, we can help educate present and future generations. Together, we can build more peaceful, resilient societies for all. Thank you.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres posting that video on this International Day of Remembrance and Tribute to the Victims of Terrorism. Story from NBC News. Democratic Congressman Bill Pascrell, whose career in rough-and-tumble New Jersey politics spanned 4 decades, and who in his later years became known for his sharp barbs against Donald Trump, died on Wednesday, according to a statement from his family posted on his official X account. He was 87. The 14-term congressman was hospitalized for nearly a month this summer after experiencing a fever related to a respiratory illness. He was discharged to a rehabilitation center on August 7th, but readmitted to the Cooperman Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey, just 4 days later. That was from NBC News. Congressman Pascrell's last appearance in the C-SPAN video library at cspan.org was a House Ways and Means Committee hearing on June 26th, and the topic, modernizing child welfare programs.
First of all, you've all been first-class witnesses, and I thank you for your courage. It takes courage to say what you said. You hear a lot of stuff around here which passes for courage. To me, courage means not only say it, but you do it. That's a tough transition, isn't it, at times? Our job, I thought our job, was to protect the least of these among us, our seniors and our children. We didn't do a very good job on the first thing. I mean, you saw what happened during the pandemic in those nursing homes. We don't know half the story. We never got it. In New Jersey, I personally listened to the Advocates for Children of New Jersey, which has advocated for kids and families for 177 years. This is not a partisan issue. This is a humanitarian cause for all of us. If we agree with that, we're halfway home.
Congressman Bill Pascrell, Democrat from New Jersey, at a House hearing on child welfare programs in late June, one of his last appearances on C-SPAN. He has died at the age of 87. House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, writing on X, Congressman Pascrell has been a relentless champion of America's working families, fighting for workers' rights and investments in the education of our children. He was a proud co-chair of the Congressional Italian-American delegation and took great pride in his hometown of Paterson, New Jersey, being the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, and he never let us forget any of it. And Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, said on X that Congressman Pascrell's was a life of service. Prior to Congress, Bill served his country honorably in the United States Army and then his community of Paterson, New Jersey, in local and state government. He will be missed. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.